Victorian Premier Jacinta Allan has stepped down and she went out as she governed, gaslighting the Victorian people. Her farewell press conference this morning was a hot mess of lies, half-truths and tearful and at times desperate rationalisations. She did not apologise for the damage she inflicted, the corruption her government oversaw. She did not acknowledge the many shortcomings of her time in power, and shortcomings is putting it nicely. She was only full of praise for herself.
I came to office in a cost of living crisis. Making life easier and more affordable became my mission. We not only made public transport free for kids, we not only made public transport free during a fuel crisis, we made public transport free for kids forever. We cut car rego for 3.5 million people. And we doubled food relief so families could have the dignity of a meal. And we're making working from home a right that your boss can't take away. Along the way, we delivered the biggest cost of living help there is: strong public schools, strong public hospitals, strong public services.
This is a woman in deep denial about her record. She's either delusional or dishonest.
I leave immensely proud of what we have achieved these past 3 years. I inherited a rising crime rate. My team and I toughened bail laws, started adult time, introduced the Violence Reduction Unit. Crime is now falling for the first time since COVID. I inherited a budget deficit. My team and I made savings whilst always protecting frontline services. The budget today is now in surplus.
The truth is, Jacinta Allan achieved precisely the opposite of what she claims. We are now more debt-riddled, we are less safe and more divided in this state. Allan never faced an election. She was installed into the top job by Daniel Andrews after he resigned in 2023. And she never faced the electorate. She won't be facing them. She has long been the most unpopular political leader in the country, with a woeful net approval rating. Let's bring in the panel. Joining me now is Institute of Public Affairs Research Fellow Colleen Harkin and Women's Forum Australia Head of Advocacy Stephanie Bastian. Stephanie, I'll start with you. Jacinta Allan leaves behind a mess. Ben Carroll has 123 days before the election to bring the party together.
I'm not sure that he'll be able to convince the Victorian people that a change of face is going to be a change of government. Having said that, he has just announced a royal commission into the corruption on the build site. So that is, I suppose, a tick in the right direction. But in terms of his ministry and everything else, he's really going to have to think carefully about what he puts on the table. He's going to have to be very blunt and honest about the crime rates, about the government waste, about the government manipulation that Jacinta Allan has fronted day in and day out. And he's going to have to address these if he wants to convince the Victorian public that the Labor government isn't just a brand new face on a dead horse.
Quick favour, if you are enjoying these breakdowns, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. Most of you watching right now have not done it yet, and it genuinely helps this channel keep digging into stories the big networks tiptoe around. Cost you nothing, takes 2 seconds. Right, now let us get into it.
Colleen, she may be the most delusional politician in this country. Just have a listen to this.
I will leave knowing I made a difference, fighting for working families, making life easier, safer, more affordable, as one part of a proud Labor team.
Incredible. She said that with a straight face.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's. I think she's living in a different state to me.
Different planet to the rest of us.
I listen to that and I just sort of think, where has she been and how could she honestly say that with a straight face?
Does she think her party essentially forced her to step down because she's doing a great job? Because this is across the board. Obviously, Labor voters are absolutely appalled by her time in office. Otherwise, she would be fighting the election coming in 123 days.
Yeah, well, she is the most disapproved Premier ever in Australian history, at 71%. The only person ever to have a high disapproval rating was Keating at 75. So, you know, when you've got that level of dissatisfaction, you can't turn around and say, I've done a great job. It's just an outrageous thing to stand there and claim.
And perhaps some of what she said today, you'd let go through to the keeper if there was at least, Stephanie, some acknowledgement of the mistakes she's made, some acknowledgement of the harms she's caused. If she said something about the crime rate that was actually accurate, if she said something about the debt we are facing and the cost of living pressures, the energy prices, but there was no acknowledgement of any errors at all. It was just one boast, Stephanie, after another.
Not an apology. There won't be an ounce of sympathy out there from the public. Everyone knows that she's been pushed out. She knows she's been pushed out, and no amount of blustering from that podium is going to change the fact that her legacy has been terrible for Victorians, and as a result, she's been sacked by her own party a few short months out from the election. They didn't trust her. I mean, Ben Carroll has tied himself to the front of a freight train that's going to crash, but he's decided to do that because the result is perceived to be so much worse with Jacinta Allan there.
Now, Stephanie, I want to play you what she said about championing women and women's health.
I want to finish on women's health. I'm a woman, I'm a mum. I've lived with endometriosis and I almost lost my daughter at birth. You all know I'm a bit of a crier. So these experiences not only defined who I am, they defined what I believe government should do for working women. For too long, women's pain was dismissed. I was one of those women. I was just a girl. And if I want to be remembered for one thing, it's this. I led a government. I led a government that listened to girls about their health.
Jacinta Allan just resigned as Premier of Victoria, except calling it a resignation is like calling a demolition a light renovation. This woman never won an election as Premier. She was installed after Daniel Andrews walked out the door in 2023, and now she's walking out too, except this time her own party basically handed her the exit sign. Here's the number that should stop you in your tracks: 71% disapproval. In the entire history of Australian politics, only Paul Keating scored worse, and he was managing a recession. Allan was managing a state with no recession excuse whatsoever. Now let us talk about her farewell speech, because honestly it deserves an award for creative writing. She said crime is falling for the first time since COVID. Victorians hearing that were probably checking their door locks twice. She said the budget is now in surplus, while Victoria continues stacking up debt like a toddler with building blocks. She said housing reform is now law, not a dream. Meanwhile, red tape is strangling supply so badly that dreaming might actually be the faster route to owning a house.
Stephanie, what's your response to that?
You know, I felt a hint of sympathy about her own personal experiences, especially losing her daughter. But watching that, I actually feel outraged because she spent millions of dollars on an inquiry into women's health and allowed men to participate. Anyone who identified as feminine or a woman. The outcome of that, those dollars resulted in an inquiry with findings that talked about biological stereotypes. What is that? That only women can give birth, or that men can as well? That's stopping men who identify as women from receiving maternity care? I mean, the whole thing is a joke. She will actually go down in history as a worse female leader than Julia Gillard, who destroyed the Sex Discrimination Act and women's rights. Her legacy is women being housed with violent male offenders in female prisons. Her legacy is girls in bathrooms no longer having the privacy without having to share with their male peers, losing sport. She has been a shocking female leader for women, and she's pulled the ladder right up behind her.
Now, Victoria has also led the nation's housing crisis. Much of what we are seeing nationally now after the May budget, we've been seeing in this state for years. But Jacinta Allan couldn't be prouder of her record.
I said getting millennials into homes would be the fight of my life. That fight is incomplete. But my reforms are no longer a dream. They are the law. Removing these laws an inch and you make housing more expensive. It's that simple.
Colleen, it's that blindness, that lack of perspective, lack of respect for the objective truth that to me is the most alarming. She really thinks what she's done for housing in this state is the way forward, and any deviation from it is going to be a disaster. Yeah,
the astounding part of this is that Victoria has so many regulations and they've made doing business here so hard and development so difficult that has what has added to the cost of building houses and for getting people in their first home buyer. So to sort of stand there and say that she's been a champion of this cause, she may well have spouted the words, but the actions did the exact opposite of what she's claiming. We still have... She keeps talking about what she inherited. I'm not sure whether she means she inherited that from Dan Andrews or whether that was 11 years ago, because either of those are not okay. You had 11 years to fix things that you inherited, or you inherited it from Dan Andrews, and so you should have done something about that scenario. So we're still sort of hearing this blaming someone else, even after all of this time that she's had an opportunity to do some things about the problems that we've got.
Now let's talk about the impact One Nation has had in this state and on the decision of the Premier to step down. Victorian Trades Hall Council Secretary Luke Hilakari told Labor delegates last Friday that One Nation are on track to win up to 34 seats. Stephanie, polling this month also found One Nation leading both major parties with a primary vote of 27%. Do you see their impact in Victoria and some of these polls we've seen recently leading to this decision today?
Oh, certainly. I mean, One Nation was the talk of the federal Labor conference we've just had here in Adelaide. They're terrified, and they should be, because while Labor runs around boasting about being the party of workers, they are taxing and putting reforms in, red tape against the employers that pay rises and everything else to their employees. Is pitting workers against their bosses, is destroying businesses, and it's also destroying the likelihood of employees doing better. So I think that without any sort of serious reform, IR reform, wage reform, tax reform from the major parties, One Nation is going to continue to rise, and no amount of shit canning Pauline in the papers and in the headlines is going to change that.
That is so right. Every time they attack her and the attacks are unfair or based on half-truths, it boosts her popularity. They still haven't learnt that after 30 years. But I want to ask you about Ben Carroll. He is from the right faction of Labor. The socialist left control the party. So it is highly unusual for him now to be leading the party into an election. How much of an impact will we have? We talked about how unpopular Jacinta Allan has been. Will we see a boost in Labor's primary vote with a new leader?
Look, I think it's going to be an interesting time because he has already announced a Royal Commission and increasing the IBAC powers. So he's kind of taken away already some of the sting of those two big issues. He's apparently already met with the police commissioner. So there's a couple of big ticket items that he's trying to, manage the voter expectations about who will do what. But at the end of the day, he is Jacinta in jeans. He's been there all the way through. He's been her right-hand man. So he can't he's trying to say, I'm not Jacinta Allan and I'm not Dan Andrews, but he's part of that team.
Well, he almost didn't become Premier today. They had a screaming match after that press conference, Jacinta Allan. There was media outside hearing shouting. Certain MPs were accusing others of trying to blow up the whole party, blow up the joint. And he saw off a challenge just with minutes to spare.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, he already declined the offer a few weeks ago. So is it really a case that he's not really supported by them, or he doesn't have the ticker? He finally got permission from his daughter, presumably.
Yes, I remember that.
There's all these machinations that the public are not usually this privy to internal Labor Party machinations and how things play out. But it is an interesting time as to how much support he actually has, because Sonia Kilkenny only withdrew her application with moments to spare. So we'll see.
That would have been a disaster for Labor. That
shocking.
would have been absolute disaster to have weeks of this infighting, determining who the leader is, and so they've seen that off. I think the Liberals have got something to worry about here. I think Jacinta Allan was a anchor around the necks of Victorian Labor, and with her gone, it may not see a significant boost to their support, but they will have a lot of disgruntled voters giving them perhaps another shot. Because one of the things in this state, no one really knows who this Ben Carroll is. He's been her deputy, but I think if we went around and polled people in the street and showed a picture of him, 90% wouldn't have a clue who he is. And I think that works in his favour.
Yeah, and he's been the Minister for Education, and so it's been a very specific portfolio that most people don't have too much access to. He's dealt with the teacher strikes reasonably well and their demands and things. So he is from the right faction of Labor. So he's not this hard left, antagonistic, social,
And that's what they will be trying to impress upon the Victorian.
Then there is the personal story angle, the endometriosis, the health scare with her daughter used to frame her legacy. Powerful stuff emotionally. But here is the catch. Multi-million-dollar inquiries into women's health somehow drifted into territory that had nothing to do with biology, creating confusion instead of clarity and controversy instead of care. Enter Ben Carroll, the new Premier, who one commentator brutally described as a brand new face on a dead horse. Ouch. 90% of Victorians reportedly would not recognise him walking down the street. He has announced a royal commission into construction corruption and wants to expand anti-corruption powers, which sounds good on paper, but so did everything Allan promised. Meanwhile, One Nation is polling at 27%, ahead of both major parties because working-class voters are done being lectured and want results instead. Carroll has just over 100 days before the next election to prove he is a fresh start, not just another rider on the same tired horse. That is the wrap for today. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Oz William, and I will see you in the next one.